He said my fiancé rubs him the wrong way. Should I be worried? Welcome back and enjoy the story. The dinner plates clinked softly as Julia cleared the table, her mind still processing the conversation with her father. She'd come over for their usual Thursday night dinner, but tonight had taken an unexpected turn. With her mother busy in the kitchen, her father had seized the moment to share his concerns about Ian, her fiancé of 8 months. "There's just something about him that rubs me the wrong way, Jules," he had whispered, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like he's not one of us." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the summer humidity that clung to Chicago's streets. As she placed the dishes in the sink, she caught her reflection in the kitchen window. At 30, Julia Barrett had finally found someone who made her feel complete. Ian Mackenzie was everything she'd ever wanted: intelligent, hard-working, ambitious and deeply devoted to her. Their summer wedding was only 3 months away, with invitations already sent and deposits paid. Yet her father's words had planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't shake. "Need help with those?" Her mother, Donna, stepped beside her, taking a plate from her hands. In the reflection, Julia could see their resemblance, the same auburn hair, though her mother's was now streaked with silver, the same slightly upturned nose and determined chin. "Mom," Julia began, her voice low, "did you know Dad doesn't like Ian?" Donna's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. "Your father is protective, sweetheart. He just wants to make sure you're making the right choice." "But why now? The wedding is in 3 months." "Because he's your father, and he worries." Donna dried her hands on a dish towel. "He sees a young man who comes from money, who has different values, and he's afraid that you'll change, that you'll forget where you came from." Julia felt a flash of indignation. "That's ridiculous. I love who I am, where I came from. Ian knows that." "Does he?" Donna asked, her tone gentle. "Your father mentioned that Ian was talking about his parents buying a second home at the coast. That's a world away from how we live, honey." Julia bit her lip, remembering the conversation. Ian had just been answering a question, not bragging, but she could see how it might have come across to her father. "He wasn't bragging, Mom. That's just his life." For the first time, she wondered if the gap between her world and Ian's was wider than she'd allowed herself to believe. Later that night, as Julia drove back to the apartment she shared with Ian in downtown Chicago, the city lights blurred through her tears. She thought about her childhood in the modest South Side neighborhood where her parents still lived. Her father, Tom, had worked as a mechanic at the same garage for 30 years, while her mother had been a school secretary. They'd never had much money, but there had always been love, laughter, and a sense of community. Neighborhood cookouts, impromptu gatherings, doors always open to friends and family. That had been her world. Ian's world was different. His father was a successful orthopedic surgeon, his mother a real estate developer. He'd grown up in the North Shore suburbs, attended private schools, and now worked as an investment banker. He was meticulous, planned, everything down to the last detail, and yes, he was financially secure in a way her family had never been. But he loved her fiercely, supported her career as an elementary school art teacher, and never made her feel less than. At least, that's what she'd always believed. As she parked in their building's garage, Julia made a decision. She wouldn't tell Ian about her father's concerns, at least not yet. Instead, she would watch more carefully, try to see Ian through her father's eyes. Maybe there was something she'd missed, some fundamental incompatibility that familiarity had blinded her to. Or maybe, just maybe, her father was wrong, and she needed to find a way to help him see the Ian she knew and loved. With a deep breath, she wiped away her tears and headed for the elevator, the weight of her decision settling uncomfortably on her shoulders. The apartment was quiet when Julia entered, but the soft glow from Ian's home office told her he was still working. She slipped off her shoes, padded across the hardwood floors, and paused in the doorway. Ian sat, hunched over his laptop, his dark blonde hair falling slightly over his forehead, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 26, 4 years her junior, he had already achieved more professionally than most people did in a lifetime. Sometimes she wondered if that drive, that ambition, came at a cost she hadn't yet recognized. "Hey," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Ian looked up, his face immediately softening into a smile. "Hey you, how was dinner with your parents?" Julia hesitated, then crossed the room to kiss him lightly. "It was good. Mom made her famous lasagna." "Sorry I missed it." He closed his laptop. "This deal is killing me, but it should be wrapped up by next week." She studied him, trying to see what her father saw. Was there something cold in his efficiency, something calculating in his ambition? Or was he just different from the men she'd grown up around? Men like her father, who lived paycheck to paycheck, who found joy in simple pleasures rather than achievement. "What?" Ian asked, noticing her scrutiny. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just tired, and I missed you." He pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her. "I missed you too. Hey, I was thinking after the wedding, maybe we could take your parents to dinner at the Alinea as a thank you for everything." The Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, with prices that would make her father uncomfortable. It was exactly the kind of gesture that highlighted the differences between Ian and her family, well-intentioned but completely misaligned with who they were. "That's sweet, but maybe somewhere more casual. Dad's not really a fancy restaurant kind of guy." Ian nodded, but she could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or confusion at why anyone would turn down what he considered a treat. "Whatever you think is best. You know them better than I do." And that was the problem, wasn't it? After a year and a half together, Ian still didn't really know her parents, still saw them as people to impress rather than people to understand. Was that his fault, or had she failed to bridge their worlds effectively? As she lay in bed that night, Ian's arm draped protectively over her waist, Julia stared at the ceiling, her father's words echoing in her mind. What if he was right? What if Ian was too different, too focused on money and status? What if she was making a terrible mistake? But then Ian stirred in his sleep, pulling her closer, murmuring her name with such tenderness that her doubts momentarily receded. This was the man she loved, the man who had proposed on a random Tuesday evening in their kitchen, not with a grand gesture, but with simple, heartfelt words about wanting to build a life together. Surely her father was wrong. Surely love could bridge their differences. With that comforting thought, Julia finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that the coming weeks would test not only her relationship with Ian, but her understanding of herself and what she truly wanted from life. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their apartment, painting golden patterns across the polished hardwood floors. Julia sat at the kitchen island, coffee mug in hand, watching Ian prepare for work with his usual methodical precision. His suit was impeccably tailored, his movements efficient as he gathered his keys, wallet and phone. "I'll be home late tonight," he said, checking his watch. "The Peterson account is in the final stages." Julia nodded, wondering not for the first time if this was what their marriage would look like, her waiting while he built his career, precisely scheduled dates penciled into his calendar weeks in advance. Her father's words from the previous night echoed in her mind. Does he ever let his hair down, Jules? Does he know how to have fun? "Maybe we could do something spontaneous this weekend," she suggested. "The weather's supposed to be nice. We could pack a picnic, head to the lake." Ian paused, considering. "I was actually planning to review our wedding budget on Saturday. The florist called yesterday and mentioned an issue with the centerpieces." He must have seen something in her expression, because he quickly added, "But we could do both. Budget in the morning, picnic in the afternoon." Even their spontaneity had to be scheduled. Was that what bothered her father? This fundamental difference in approaching life? Sure, she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. That sounds good. He crossed the kitchen to kiss her goodbye, his lips soft against hers. I love you. Don't let the third graders give you too much trouble today. Despite herself, Julia smiled. Fourth graders. And they're angels compared to investment bankers. Ian laughed, a genuine sound that reminded her why she'd fallen for him in the first place. Fair point. See you tonight. After he left, Julia sat in the quiet apartment thinking. Perhaps she needed to be more deliberate about bringing their worlds together. Maybe if her parents spent more time with Ian outside of formal occasions, like their engagement dinner, they would see what she saw in him. And maybe if Ian understood more about where she came from, he would find ways to connect with her father that didn't involve expensive gestures. With sudden determination, she reached for her phone and texted her mother. Sunday dinner this weekend? I'm bringing Ian. The response came quickly. Of course, sweetheart, your father will grill his famous ribs. Julia smiled, already imagining Ian in her parents' backyard, surrounded by the chaotic warmth of her family. It was a start. The week passed in a blur of art classes and wedding preparations. Julia tried to push her father's concerns to the back of her mind, focusing instead on the upcoming Sunday dinner. She hadn't told Ian yet, wanting to present it as a casual, last-minute decision rather than the carefully orchestrated opportunity for connection that it was. Friday evening found her in their bedroom closet, contemplating what Ian should wear to dinner. His wardrobe consisted primarily of suits, designer casual wear that cost more than her monthly salary, and workout clothes. Nothing that would help him blend in at her parents' backyard gathering. What are you doing? Ian's voice came from behind her, amused. Julia turned, slightly embarrassed to be caught in the act. Just organizing. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing her. In my closet? On the one night this week I'm home before 8? I thought we could go to my parents for dinner on Sunday, she blurted out. Dad's making ribs. I was trying to figure out what you could wear that wouldn't scream rich boy. Ian finished for her, his voice carefully neutral. Julia winced. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? He leaned against the doorframe, studying her. Julia, I know your father doesn't particularly like me. I'm not blind. She felt her heart rate quicken. That's not true. He doesn't know you very well. And whose fault is that? Every time I suggest spending time with your family, you find a reason why it won't work. The accusation stung, partly because there was truth to it. She had been keeping their worlds separate, perhaps subconsciously aware of the potential for friction. That's not fair. I've invited you to plenty of family events. Formal events, holidays, occasions where everyone is on their best behavior and no one says what they're really thinking. Ian sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to know your family, Julia. The real them, not the polite version. They show me at Christmas dinner. His words surprised her. Had she misjudged his interest in her family? Had she been the one creating distance, not him? Sunday dinner would be a good start, she said cautiously, but it's going to be casual. Really casual, like paper plates, and everyone serving themselves casual. Ian smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I do know how to use paper plates, you know. I wasn't raised by wolves. No, just by surgeons who probably performed formal dinner etiquette drills before you could walk. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. My mother would love that. Characterization. She's more likely to serve dinner on the hood of a car if she's in the middle of a development project. This image of Ian's usually polished mother eating takeout on a construction site made Julia pause. Perhaps she had been making assumptions about his family that were no more accurate than her father's assumptions about Ian. So, we'll go to dinner on Sunday, she said, relaxing into his embrace. and you'll wear jeans and a t-shirt and charm my father with your extensive knowledge of whatever it is men talk about. Sports, Ian supplied helpfully. Cars, power tools, the impending zombie apocalypse. Julia giggled, imagining Ian discussing zombie survival tactics with her practical, down-to-earth father. Maybe stick to sports. I can talk about sports, he said confidently. I played lacrosse in college. Julia groaned. Lacrosse? Of course you did. What's wrong with lacrosse? Nothing. It's just the most preppy North Shore private school sport imaginable. Ian grinned, not offended. Would it help if I said I also enjoy beer and occasionally scratch myself inappropriately? She swatted his arm, laughing. Don't you dare! Just be yourself. Your real self, not your banker self. I'll leave the banker self at home, he promised, kissing the top of her head, though he does pay for this rather nice apartment. The banker self can stay financially involved, Julia conceded. Just don't let him do the talking. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms and laughing about Sunday's dinner, Julia felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe Ian would connect with her father, and her father would see the man she loved, kind, funny, caring, rather than the successful banker with the privileged background. Maybe their worlds weren't as incompatible as she feared. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The vintage clock on the Barrett family's kitchen wall ticked loudly, marking each second of uncomfortable silence around the dinner table. Julia shifted in her chair, stealing glances between Ian and her father. So far, the Sunday dinner was not going as planned. Ian had arrived dressed perfectly. Dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking casual, but still himself. He'd brought flowers for her mother and craft beer for her father, selections Julia had subtly guided him toward the day before. But despite these efforts, conversation had stalled almost immediately. So, Tom Barrett said finally, cutting into his ribs with more force than necessary, Julia tells me you're working on some big deal at the bank. Ian nodded, clearly trying to gauge how much interest was genuine and how much was obligatory. It's a merger between two manufacturing companies, nothing very exciting. Must be exciting enough if it keeps you at the office until all hours, Tom remarked, and Julia winced at the barely concealed criticism. Dad, she warned quietly. What? I'm just making conversation, he turned back to Ian. What exactly do you do all day? Push papers around, move money from one rich person to another? Donna placed a hand on her husband's arm. Tom, please. Ian, to his credit, remained calm. It's a fair question. A lot of what I do is analysis. Looking at companies' financial health, market conditions, growth potential. I help businesses find the capital they need to expand, which ultimately creates jobs and economic growth. Tom snorted. Sounds like a fancy way of saying you help the rich get richer. Sometimes, Ian acknowledged, surprising Julia. But sometimes I help family-owned businesses survive transitions or find the resources to compete with corporate giants. It's not all wolves of Wall Street. Julia held her breath, watching her father's reaction. There was a moment of consideration before Tom gave a grudging nod. Fair enough. A small victory, but Julia would take it. The conversation shifted to safer topics. The unseasonably warm spring, Julia's upcoming art show at her school, the Cubs' chances this season. Ian revealed a surprising knowledge of baseball statistics, which earned him another reluctant point from Tom. After dinner, while Julia helped her mother clear the table, she watched through the kitchen window as Ian and her father stood by the grill, beers in hand. They weren't exactly chatting like old friends, but they weren't glaring at each other either. Progress, she thought hopefully. He's trying. Donna observed, following Julia's gaze. And so is your father in his way. I just wish Dad would give him a real chance. Julia rinsed a plate more vigorously than necessary. Ian's a good man, Mom. He makes me happy. Does he? Donna asked, her voice gentle. Truly happy? Julia turned to her mother, surprised by the question. Of course. Why would you ask that? Because I see the way you've been watching him all evening, like you're waiting for him to make a mistake, and I see the way you tense up whenever your father speaks, ready to jump in and smooth things over. Donna dried her hands on a dish towel. That doesn't look like happiness to me, sweetheart. It looks like stress. Julia wanted to deny it, but couldn't find the words. Was she happy? Of course she was. She loved Ian. But these past few days, ever since her father had voiced his concerns, she'd been second-guessing everything, her relationship, her future, even her own judgment. It's just wedding jitters, she said finally, not entirely convincing herself. Once we're married, once Dad gets to know Ian better, everything will settle down. Donna studied her daughter thoughtfully. Maybe, but remember, marriage doesn't solve problems, it magnifies them. If there are issues now, real issues, not just your father being overprotective, they won't disappear with a wedding ring. Before Julia could respond, the back door opened, and Ian stepped into the kitchen. Your father's looking for matches for the fire pit, he explained, clearly unaware of the conversation he'd interrupted. In the drawer by the stove, Donna replied, shooting Julia a meaningful look before turning to Ian with a smile. Why? Don't you two enjoy the fire? I'll bring out some dessert in a bit. Outside, Tom had arranged chairs around the fire pit in the corner of the small backyard. The space was nothing like the manicured gardens of Ian's parents' home, but there was a charm to its imperfection. The slightly overgrown flower beds, the mismatched patio furniture, the strings of multicolored lights Donna had hung years ago and never taken down. As the fire crackled to life, casting a warm glow over the gathering dusk, Julia found herself watching Ian. He sat comfortably in one of the weather-worn Adirondack chairs, seemingly at ease despite the evening's awkward moments. Was her mother right? Was she constantly anticipating problems rather than simply enjoying their relationship? So, Ian, Tom said, settling into his favorite chair, Julia tells me your parents are looking at property on the coast, building a second home. Julia tensed, recognizing the potential minefield. This was exactly the kind of topic that highlighted the economic divide between their families, the very thing that had triggered her father's initial concerns. But Ian just nodded, his expression relaxed. They've been talking about it for years. My mom grew up near the ocean and misses it. Dad's finally cutting back his hours at the hospital, so they're looking for a place to eventually retire. Must be nice, Tom remarked, and Julia couldn't tell if the comment was sincere or sarcastic. They've worked hard, Ian said simply. Just like you and Mrs. Barrett have. Different fields, different outcomes, but the same ethic. Tom studied Ian over the rim of his beer bottle, and Julia held her breath, waiting for a dismissive response. But her father surprised her. That's true enough. No one can say I haven't provided for my family, even if we don't have vacation homes. You've provided more than a roof and food, Mr. Barrett, Ian said quietly. You've given Julia values, a sense of community. That's worth more than any beachfront property. Julia stared at Ian, touched by his words and the genuine respect in his voice. It was the first time she'd heard him acknowledge what her parents had given her, what her upbringing had meant. Tom seemed equally surprised, his weathered face softening slightly. Well, he said gruffly, we did our best. The conversation lulled into a more comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, a dog barking, someone practicing guitar on a nearby porch. These were the sounds of Julia's childhood. the backdrop to a life that had shaped her into the woman she was now. Ian seemed to be listening too, his expression thoughtful. "It's nice here," he said finally. "Peaceful. You can feel the history." Tom looked around his modest backyard, seeing it perhaps through Ian's eyes. Been in this house 32 years. Raised Julia here, watched the neighborhood change, watched families come and go. Some things stay the same, though. Mrs. Patel next door still makes the best samosas you've ever tasted, and Mr. Guzman, across the street, still plays the same 3 jazz records every Sunday afternoon. Ian smiled. "That's what I mean, history, community. My parents moved every few years when I was growing up, always a bigger house, a better neighborhood. I never had this kind of rootedness." Julia looked at him in surprise. He'd never shared this perspective before, this hint of something missing in his privileged upbringing. She wondered what other aspects of her world he might secretly envy, just as she had sometimes envied the opportunities his wealth had provided. The evening continued, warmer now in both temperature and tone. As Donna brought out slices of homemade apple pie, Julia allowed herself to relax, to hope that perhaps the gap between her two worlds wasn't as unbridgeable as she'd feared. Later, as they drove back to their apartment, the city skyline glittering in the distance, Julia turned to Ian. "Thank you for tonight. I know it wasn't easy." Ian reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It wasn't as bad as you're making. It's sound. Your dad's protective. I get that." "He can be judgmental," Julia admitted, "especially about people with money. He has this whole us versus them mentality sometimes." "Most people do, in one way or another," Ian said thoughtfully. "My parents can be just as judgmental, just in different ways." Julia considered this. She'd met Ian's parents several times, and while they'd been unfailingly polite, there had been moments. A raised eyebrow at her mention of teaching in a public school, a careful redirection when she talked about her South Side upbringing. Perhaps class prejudice ran both ways. "Did you mean what you said about envying the stability of my childhood?" Ian was quiet for a moment, focusing on the road. "Yes," he said finally. "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the opportunities I had. But there's something to be said for staying in one place, knowing your neighbors, being part of something that doesn't change with your income bracket." The revelation shifted something in Julia's understanding of Ian, adding a layer of complexity she hadn't fully appreciated before. Perhaps her father's concerns were based on a surface-level assessment, missing the deeper yearnings that motivated Ian's drive for success. "Maybe we could find a neighborhood like that," she suggested tentatively, "when we're ready to buy a house, I mean. Somewhere with character, with community." Ian glanced at her, surprise and pleasure mingling in his expression. "I'd like that, though I thought you loved our apartment." "I do," she assured him, "but eventually, when we have kids, I'd like them to have some of what I had growing up." Kids, huh?" Ian's grin broadened. "Planning our whole future now, are we?" Julia blushed, realizing she'd gotten ahead of herself. "I just mean, hypothetically." "I know what you mean," he said softly. "And I want that too. A family, a home, a community, with you." As they drove through the night, discussing possible neighborhoods and futures that suddenly seemed more aligned than divergent, Julia felt a weight lifting. Her father's concerns hadn't disappeared. There were still real differences between Ian's world and hers, but perhaps those differences could be strengths rather than obstacles, offering them both perspectives and values the other might have missed. When they arrived home, Ian pulled her close in the elevator, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "For what it's worth," he murmured, "I think your dad might hate me slightly less after tonight." Julia laughed, leaning into his embrace. "High praise. Indeed, next time he might even call you by your name instead of Julia's fiancé." "Baby steps," Ian agreed with a grin. We've got time. And that, Julia thought as they entered their apartment, was perhaps the most comforting realization of all. They had time to build understanding, to bridge differences, to create something new that honored both their backgrounds while becoming uniquely theirs. The dress hanging on the bedroom door caught the morning light, its delicate lace overlay shimmering against the ivory silk. Julia stood in front of it, coffee mug in hand, struck by the sudden reality that in just 10 weeks she would be walking down the aisle in this gown, committing her life to Ian. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The past few weeks had been better. Ian had made genuine efforts to connect with her family, joining them for dinner regularly, helping her father with a stubborn leak in the bathroom sink, even attending one of her mother's book club meetings when they discussed a financial thriller he'd actually enjoyed. Tom Barrett hadn't exactly embraced Ian as a son, but there were moments, a shared laugh, a nod of approval when Ian mentioned an investment he'd suggested for his client's children's college fund. That gave Julia hope. Beautiful, isn't it? Julia turned to find Ian standing in the doorway, already dressed for work in one of his impeccably tailored suits. He crossed the room to stand beside her, both of them contemplating the dress. It's perfect, she agreed, leaning against him. I still can't believe our wedding is so close. Having second thoughts? He asked, his tone light but his eyes searching hers intently. No, she said automatically, then paused, considering the question more carefully. Not second thoughts, just awareness, I guess. That this is big, life-changing. Ian nodded, his arm tightening around her waist. It is, but in all the best ways. Julia smiled, turning to face him fully. You know what I realized this morning? We haven't really talked about where we'll live after the wedding. I assumed we'd stay here, Ian replied, gesturing to the apartment around them. Unless you had something else in mind? Not immediately, Julia said slowly. But maybe we should start looking at neighborhoods, like we talked about, places where we might want to put down roots eventually. Something flickered in Ian's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or surprise at her planning ahead. We don't have to rush that decision. The lease here is good for another year, and my commute is perfect. I know, but what? Julia hesitated, not wanting to turn this into a bigger conversation than she'd intended. Nothing. You're right. We have time. Ian studied her face, clearly sensing there was more she wasn't saying. Julia, if you want to move sooner, we can talk about it. Is this about your dad? Do you think he'd feel better about us if we lived in a less upscale area? The question stung, partly because there was a grain of truth to it. This isn't about my dad, it's about us, our future. Yes, I'd like to live somewhere with more character than a high-rise downtown, but that doesn't mean I want to move to the south side just to please my father. I didn't mean it like that, Ian said quickly. I want you to be happy, and if living in a different kind of neighborhood would make you happy, we can start looking. Really? His sincerity calmed her irritation. Thank you, but you're right. We don't have to rush. Let's get through the wedding first, and then we can think about where we want our forever home to be. Ian kissed her softly. Deal. Speaking of the wedding, I've been meaning to ask, how do you feel about inviting my boss? He's been dropping hints, and it would be good for my career, but if you'd rather keep it to friends and family— Of course we can invite him, Julia said, though something about the request bothered her. Is his wife nice? Stephanie, she's great. Used to be a curator at the Art Institute before they had kids. You'd like her. Julia nodded, the irritation fading. Perhaps this was part of marriage too. Accommodating the professional needs of your partner, understanding that sometimes social events had dual purposes. Add them to the list, but that's it for +1s. The venue has a strict capacity. You're the best, Ian said, checking his watch. I've got to run. Early meeting with clients from Tokyo. Dinner tonight? That new Thai place you've been wanting to try? Perfect, Julia agreed, kissing him goodbye. After he left, she remained standing in front of the wedding dress, trying to pinpoint the source of her unease. It wasn't the dress, which was everything she'd dreamed of. It wasn't Ian, whom she loved more deeply every day. Perhaps it was simply the awareness that marriage meant compromise, meant sometimes setting aside your own preferences for the happiness of your partner. Was she ready for that? Was Ian? A text message interrupted her thoughts. It was from her mother. Lunch today. Need your opinion on something. Julia smiled, texting back her agreement. Time with her mother always helped center her, remind her of what was important beyond the whirlwind of wedding planning and relationship navigation. Donna Barrett was waiting at their favorite cafe, a cozy spot halfway between Julia's school and the Barrett family home. As Julia slid into the booth across from her mother, she noticed a small gift bag on the table. "What's this?" Donna smiled, pushing the bag toward her. "Open it and see." Inside, Julia found a small velvet box. Opening it carefully, she gasped at the sight of a pair of delicate pearl earrings, clearly vintage, with tiny diamonds surrounding each pearl. "Mom, these are beautiful. They were my grandmother's," Donna explained, her eyes soft with memory. "She wore them on her wedding day, and I wore them on mine. I thought, for you're something old." Tears pricked at Julia's eyes. "I'd be honored, thank you." Donna reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "How are things with Ian? Any more concerns since your father's talk?" Julia sighed, twisting the engagement ring on her finger. "Things are good, really good most of the time. Ian's been making an effort with Dad, and I think it's helping. But sometimes I still wonder if Dad is right. If our backgrounds are too different. If our values don't align as much as I thought." She looked up at her mother, vulnerability in her eyes. "How did you know? With Dad, I mean. How did you know he was the right one?" Donna considered the question thoughtfully. "I knew because when I pictured my future, he was always in it. Not just as a presence, but as a partner, someone who made my life better, fuller. Someone who challenged me sometimes, but always respected who I was at my core." She paused, stirring her tea. "But you know, we were very similar when we met. Both from working-class families, both with the same values about money, family, community. We didn't have the kinds of differences you and Ian are navigating." "Do you think those differences are insurmountable?" Julia asked quietly. "No," Donna replied firmly, "but they require work, understanding and compromise from both of you. The question isn't whether you come from different worlds, it's whether you're both willing to create a new world together, one that honors both your backgrounds." Julia nodded, absorbing her mother's wisdom. "Ian's been open to that. He even talked about wanting to live in a real neighborhood eventually, not just a luxury building." "That's a good sign," Donna acknowledged. "But what about the bigger questions? Children, how you'll raise them, financial decisions. Do you share values there, or at least understand each other's perspectives?" The questions hit at the heart of Julia's unease. They had discussed children in the abstract. Agreed. They both wanted a family someday, but they hadn't delved into the specifics. Public school versus private, allowances versus earning privileges, the kinds of traditions and values they would prioritize. "We haven't talked about a lot of that," Julia admitted. "I guess I assumed we'd figure it out as we went along." Donna looked skeptical. "Some things, yes. But it helps to know you're on the same page about the fundamentals before you say, 'I do.'" Julia thought about Ian, about his privileged upbringing, and the values it had instilled in him. He was generous, hard-working, ambitious. But he also took certain comforts for granted, approached problems with the confidence of someone who had never experienced true financial insecurity. Would that translate to differences in how they raised their children, how they navigated life's challenges together? I think we need to have those conversations, Julia said, resolve forming as she spoke. Before the wedding, I want to be sure we're aligned on the things that really matter. That's my wise girl, Donna smiled, pride evident in her eyes. Now tell me about the flowers. Did you decide on peonies or roses for the bridesmaids' bouquets? The conversation shifted to wedding details, but Julia's mind remained on the deeper questions she needed to address with Ian. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the small Thai restaurant, steam rising from bowls of fragrant curry, she decided to broach the subject. I had lunch with my mom today, she began, pushing a piece of tofu around with her chopsticks. How is she? Ian asked, genuinely interested. He had grown fond of Donna, finding in her a warmth and practicality he admired. Good. She gave me her grandmother's pearl earrings to wear at the wedding. Julia paused, gathering her courage. We also talked about us, our future, things we maybe haven't discussed enough. Ian set down his chopsticks, giving her his full attention. Like what? Like how we'll handle finances as a married couple, whether we'll have joint accounts or keep things separate, how we'll make decisions about big purchases. I've always assumed we'd have a joint account for household expenses and separate accounts for personal spending, Ian replied, looking slightly surprised by the topic. Isn't that fairly standard? Maybe for people from your background, Julia said carefully. My parents have always had just one account. Everything is ours, not mine, and yours. Ian considered this. I'm not opposed to that approach. It's just different from what I'm used to. My parents kept separate finances. And what about children, private school or public, allowances? How much emphasis on academics versus other pursuits? A small furrow appeared between Ian's brows. That's a lot of questions at once. Where is this coming from, Julia? She took a deep breath. I realized today that we've been so caught up in planning the wedding that we haven't really talked about the marriage, about how we'll blend our different backgrounds, values, expectations. And you're worried we won't agree on these things, Ian stated, his voice carefully neutral. I'm worried we haven't even discussed them, Julia corrected. I'm worried we've both made assumptions based on our own upbringings without checking whether those assumptions align. Ian was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Then he reached across the table for her hand. You're right. We should talk about these things, all of them, but not because we need to agree on everything right now. We need to understand each other's perspectives so we can find our own way forward, together. His response, so thoughtful and open, eased some of the tension that had been building in Julia's chest. So, children? Ian smiled. Public school, at least for elementary. I went to private school from kindergarten through high school, and while the education was excellent, I missed out on the kind of community you talk about from your school experience. But I would want to evaluate options for middle and high school based on each child's needs and the quality of local schools. Julia nodded, surprised and pleased by his thoughtfulness. And allowances. A modest base allowance to teach financial management, with opportunities to earn more through chores or projects that go beyond basic family responsibilities, Ian replied without hesitation. Money shouldn't be tied to love or basic needs, but understanding the connection between work and reward is important. They continued talking as their food grew cold, exploring their views on everything from holiday traditions to retirement, planning. On some issues they aligned perfectly, on others they discovered differences that would require compromise and understanding. But through it all, Julia felt a growing confidence in their ability to navigate these differences, to create a shared vision that honored both their backgrounds. I'm sorry I've been so wrapped up in work that we haven't had these conversations sooner, Ian said, as they walked home, choosing to enjoy the warm spring evening rather than taking a cab. Sometimes I get so focused on building our financial security that I forget to build our emotional foundation too. Julia squeezed his hand, and I sometimes get so worried about our differences that I forget to appreciate how much we agree on the things that really matter. As they approached their building, Ian suddenly stopped, turning to face her under the glow of a streetlight. You know what? Let's do it. Do what? Start looking at neighborhoods, not just for someday, but now. Let's find a place that feels like home to both of us, where we can start building that community you value so much. Julia stared at him, surprised by the sudden decision. But what about your commute? The lease? Ian shrugged, a new lightness in his expression. The lease has a reasonable buyout clause, and I can handle a longer commute. What I can't handle is seeing you question whether we're right for each other because I'm too stubborn to consider a different zip code. She felt a surge of emotion so strong it momentarily robbed her of speech. This was why she loved him, not despite their differences, but because of how they navigated them together. Are you sure? Absolutely, he affirmed, pulling her close. Besides, your mother gave me some pretty compelling arguments about the benefits of neighborhood barbecues and block parties. Did you know your dad makes award-winning chili for the annual cook-off? Julia laughed, imagining that conversation. When did my mother tell you this? Last week, when I stopped by to help your dad with that leaky sink. She showed me photo albums of neighborhood events from when you were growing up. You were a very cute kid with no front teeth, by the way. The thought of Ian bonding with her mother over childhood photos while fixing plumbing with her father filled Julia with a deep contentment. Perhaps the bridges between their worlds were already stronger than she'd realized. That night, as they lay in bed discussing potential neighborhoods, Julia felt the last of her doubts begin to fade. There would always be differences between them, in background, in perspective, in their approach to life's challenges. But those differences could be strengths rather than obstacles, offering them both the opportunity to grow and evolve together. What about Ravenswood? Ian suggested, scrolling through real estate listings on his tablet. Good schools, diverse community, character-filled homes, but still a reasonable commute to downtown. Julia smiled, leaning against his shoulder to look at the screen. I've always loved that area. My art teacher in high school lived there. She had this amazing craftsman house with a studio in the backyard. Studios can be added, Ian noted, bookmarking a particularly promising listing. Assuming you might want to expand your artistic pursuits beyond elementary school art classes someday. The comment caught Julia by surprise. She had majored in fine arts in college, but had set aside her personal artistic ambitions when she began teaching. That Ian had noticed, had seen that part of her that sometimes yearned for more, touched her deeply. Maybe, she acknowledged softly. Someday. Ian set aside the tablet, turning to face her in the dim light. Julia, I want you to know something. I don't just want to make compromises about where we live or how we handle money. I want us both to thrive, to pursue our passions, to become the best versions of ourselves. If that means a house with a studio for you, or flexible work hours, or eventually a different career path altogether, I'm all in. Julia blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the depth of his understanding. When did you get so wise about relationships? Ian grinned. I had a good teacher, this amazing woman who showed me that success isn't just about the size of your bank account or the prestige of your address. It's about connection, community, finding joy in the everyday moments. She sounds impressive, Julia teased, curling closer to him. She is, Ian agreed, his voice growing serious. And every day I'm grateful she's chosen to share her life with me, even if her father thinks I'm an uptight rich boy who doesn't know how to have fun. Julia laughed, but the mention of her father brought a new thought. You know, I think Dad is starting to see beyond that initial impression. The fact that you've been willing to engage with him on his terms, in his space, that means something to him. I hope so, Ian said, because I meant what I said to him that night by the fire pit. What he and your mom gave you. That sense of belonging, of community, of values beyond material success. That's a gift I never had growing up, and it's something I want for our children. Our children. The words hung in the air between them, both a promise and a declaration. Julia felt her heart expand with love and certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for their differences rather than divided by them. I love you, she whispered, the simple words carrying the weight of her realization that their love was not fragile or conditional, but resilient enough to withstand the honest exploration of their differences. I love you too, Ian replied, drawing her closer. Enough to learn how to use a charcoal grill and discuss sports with your father every Sunday for the rest of my life. Julia laughed, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. That, Mr. Mackenzie, is true love. As they drifted towards sleep, plans for house hunting floating through their dreams, Julia felt a profound peace settle over her. Her father's concerns had not been groundless. There were real differences between her world and Ian's, but they were differences that could be bridged with love, understanding, and a willingness to create something new together. The weekend forecast called for rain, but Saturday morning dawned unexpectedly sunny and clear. Julia took it as a good omen as she and Ian set out for their first day of serious house hunting. They had appointments to view properties in 3 different neighborhoods, each offering a different balance of community, character, and convenience. I still can't believe we're doing this, Julia said, as they drove toward their first appointment in Ravenswood. A month ago, you were all about staying downtown. Ian shrugged, looking surprisingly relaxed in jeans and a casual button-down. A month ago, I hadn't really thought about what we both want long-term. I was just defaulting to what seemed most practical for work. And now? Now I'm thinking about what will make us both happy. What will feel like home, not just a place. To live. He glanced at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Besides, I've been doing some research. Ravenswood has that coffee shop you love, and the commute isn't as bad as I feared. The first house they viewed was a disappointment. Beautifully renovated, but lacking the character they'd hoped for. The second was charming, but would require more renovation than they wanted to tackle. The third, however, made Julia's heart skip a beat the moment they walked through the door. It was a 1920s craftsman, lovingly maintained with original woodwork, built-in bookshelves, and a sun-filled breakfast nook. The backyard, while modest, featured a mature maple tree and enough space for both a small garden and, potentially, a studio someday. The neighborhood was a mix of families, young professionals and retirees who had lived there for decades. "What do you think?" the realtor asked, watching Julia's face as she wandered from room to room, imagining their life in this space. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning to Ian with hopeful eyes. He was examining the kitchen, opening cabinets and checking appliances with his usual methodical approach. But when he looked up and met her gaze, she saw the same excitement reflected in his expression. "The master bedroom is small," he noted, "and the second bathroom needs updating." "But," Julia prompted, hearing the unspoken caveat in his tone. "But I can see us here," he admitted, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Sunday dinners with your parents in that dining room. Christmas mornings in front of that fireplace. Our kids doing homework at the kitchen island." Our kids. There. It was again that shared vision of their future that made Julia's heart swell. She crossed the room to stand beside him, suddenly not caring that the realtor was watching with barely concealed delight at the prospect of a quick sale. "Do you really see all that?" she asked softly. Ian nodded, his expression serious despite his smile. "I do, and I see how happy you are just being in this space. That matters to me, Julia." They made an offer that afternoon, slightly below asking price, but strong enough to be competitive in the hot Chicago market. As they waited for the seller's response, they drove to Julia's parents' house, both buzzing with the excitement of potential homeowners. Tom and Donna were surprised but delighted by the news, especially when they learned the location. "Ravenswood? That's a great area," Tom approved. "Solid construction in those older homes, good investment." "We're not thinking of it as an investment, Dad," Julia corrected gently. "We're thinking of it as a home, a place to put down roots." Tom's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Even better." He turned to Ian with newfound respect. "Didn't think you'd be the type to appreciate an older neighborhood like that, but I'm glad to be wrong." "I'm learning to see the value in different things," Ian replied, his tone sincere rather than defensive. "Julia's helping me with that." May, Donna, always perceptive, caught Julia's eye with a knowing smile. Whatever she saw in her daughter's face seemed to please her, because she squeezed Julia's hand and whispered, "He's coming along nicely, isn't he?" The next week passed in a blur of negotiations, inspections, and mortgage discussions. To Julia's surprise, Ian suggested they put the house in both their names from the start, rather than waiting until after the wedding. "It's our home," he insisted. "I want it to be ours legally as well." The gesture touched her deeply. For all his careful financial planning and occasional caution, Ian was committed to building a true partnership, one where major assets were shared rather than separated. By Thursday, they had an accepted offer and a closing date set for just after their honeymoon. That evening, they met friends for dinner to celebrate both the house and their upcoming wedding. As Julia watched Ian across the table, laughing with her college roommate's husband about some shared joke, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was the man she wanted to build a life with, to create a home with, to navigate all of life's challenges and joys alongside. Later, as they walked home through the warm spring night, Ian's arm wrapped comfortably around her shoulders, Julia broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I was thinking," she began, "we should invite your parents to dinner at my parents' house before the wedding. A casual dinner, nothing fancy, just family getting to know family." Ian's step faltered slightly. "Are you sure? Our parents are so different. What if they don't get along?" "Then at least they'll have tried," Julia reasoned. "And who knows? They might surprise us. Your mom and my mom are both strong, practical women. Your dad and my dad, both. Value hard work and providing for their families. There could be common ground there." Ian looked skeptical, but nodded slowly. "Okay, but let's do it at a restaurant, neutral territory." Julia considered this, then shook her head. "No. If we're serious about blending our lives, about creating something that honors both our backgrounds, then our parents should see each other in their authentic environments. Let's start with dinner at my parents' place. Then we can do something at your parents' home another time." Ian was quiet for a moment, clearly picturing his polished, sophisticated parents at the Barrett family's modest kitchen table. "My mother will bring an extremely expensive bottle of wine and ask too many questions about the food. My father will try to talk to your father about golf, which I'm guessing is not his sport." "Probably not," Julia agreed with a laugh. "But your mum's questions might actually make my mum feel valued for her cooking skills, which she's quite proud of. And your dad might discover that mine knows an impressive amount about classic cars, which I seem to recall is one of your father's hobbies." Ian looked surprised. "How did you know that?" "I pay attention," Julia said simply. "When you mentioned that your dad restored that old Mustang in your garage, I filed that away." Just like I notice when you make an effort with my family, when you ask my father about his work at the garage, when you help my mother clear the table without being asked." Ian pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Have I told you lately how amazing you are?" "Not since breakfast," she teased, but her heart was full. This was the essence of what they were building together, a relationship where both paid attention, both made efforts, both worked to understand and appreciate the other's world. "Dinner with both sets of parents," Ian sighed dramatically. "The things I do for love. Just think of it as practice for when we host holiday gatherings in our new house," Julia replied cheerfully. "Imagine Thanksgiving with both families around that beautiful dining room table." "Now you're just being cruel," Ian groaned. But his eyes were alight with humor and something deeper, a shared vision of their future, challenges and all. The parental dinner was set for the following weekend, a Sunday evening at the Barrett family home. Julia spent the day helping her mother prepare, both of them determined to create a welcoming atmosphere without being too formal or trying too hard to impress. "Just be yourselves," Julia had advised her parents. "That's what I want Ian's parents to see, who you really are, not some version you think they'll approve of." Tom had grumbled something about not knowing how to be anyone else anyway, but he'd agreed to wear a clean shirt and save his more colorful opinions on politics and the economy for another occasion. As the appointed hour approached, Julia felt her nerves increasing. She wanted so badly for this to go well, for these two families that would soon be joined through her and Ian to find common ground, to develop if not a close relationship, then at least a respectful and cordial one. Ian arrived first, looking slightly tense but handsome in dark jeans and a casual blazer, a perfect balance of respect for the occasion without overdressing. He carried a bouquet of flowers for Donna and a bottle of Tom's favorite beer, Touches, that made Julia's heart swell with pride and love. "They'll be here any minute," he reported, checking his watch. "My mother texted that they're caught in traffic, which means they're running exactly on schedule but want a buffer in case they're late." Julia laughed, recognizing the familiar Mackenzie family precision. "Let me guess, they'll arrive exactly 3 minutes early, flowers and wine in hand." 2 minutes early, Ian corrected with a grin. "And it'll be flowers and scotch. My father did his research on your dad's preferences." Sure enough, the doorbell rang at precisely 5:58 p.m. Julia took a deep breath, squeezed Ian's hand for courage, and opened the door to the next chapter of their shared journey. Dr. James Mackenzie and his wife, Margaret, were everything Julia had expected, polished, well-dressed, and carrying perfectly selected gifts. What she hadn't expected was the genuine warmth in Margaret's smile or the slightly nervous energy radiating from James as he extended his hand to Tom Barrett. "Mr. Barrett, thank you for having us in your home," he said formally, but with sincere appreciation. "I brought this bottle of Macallan. Ian mentioned you enjoy a good scotch." Tom looked momentarily surprised, then nodded with approval. "That's mighty thoughtful. And please call me Tom." "James," Ian's father replied, visibly relaxing. "And this is my wife, Margaret." "Please, Maggie," she corrected, handing Donna a beautiful arrangement of lilies. "Only my patients call me Margaret, and that's because Maggie, the real estate agent, doesn't inspire quite the same confidence." Donna laughed, accepting the flowers with genuine pleasure. "They're lovely, and dinner's almost ready. Can I get you something to drink while we wait?" As the evening progressed, Julia watched with growing relief and happiness as the two sets of parents found unexpected common ground. Tom and James discovered a shared passion for classic cars, with Tom's practical knowledge of engines complementing James's enthusiasm for restoration. Donna and Margaret bonded over stories of raising headstrong children and the challenges of balancing work and family. There were awkward moments, certainly, Margaret's inadvertent comment about quaint neighborhood traditions, Tom's barely concealed eye roll at James's description of his golf club membership, but they were outweighed by genuine efforts on both sides to connect and understand. By the time dessert was served, a homemade apple pie that prompted sincere compliments from both Mackenzies, the atmosphere had relaxed considerably. As coffee was poured, Margaret turned to Julia with a warm smile. "Julia, I want to thank you for suggesting this dinner. I've been wanting to know your parents better, but wasn't sure how to approach it. Sometimes our world can be a bit insular." "We've been wanting to know you better too," Donna replied before Julia could respond. "After all, we're going to be family in just a few weeks." Family. The word hung in the air, simple but profound in its implications. These people, from such different backgrounds and lifestyles, would soon be connected through Julia and Ian, their future grandchildren. To both sets of parents, their lives intertwined in ways that transcended social class and economic status. To family, James proposed, raising his coffee cup in a toast that everyone joined, even Tom, who had been the most reserved throughout the evening. Later, as they said their goodbyes, Julia overheard Tom speaking quietly to Ian by the door. "You're not what I expected, Mackenzie," her father admitted gruffly. "When Julia first brought you home, I thought she was making a mistake. Thought you were just another rich kid playing at love until something better came along." Ian stiffened slightly, but held Tom's gaze. "And now?" Tom considered for a moment, then extended his hand. "Now I think she could do worse." "You're good. To her. You listen to her. That matters more than where you come from or how much money you have." Ian shook Tom's hand, relief and gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you." "Don't make me regret saying it," Tom warned, but there was no real heat in his words. "And for God's sake, call me Tom." Already, as they walked to their car, Ian's parents ahead of them deep in conversation with Donna about wedding details, Ian squeezed Julia's hand. "That went better than I expected," he murmured. "Mine too," Julia admitted, "though I think your mother was a bit shocked by Dad's stories about his wilder days." "Are you kidding? She was fascinated. I haven't seen her that engaged at a dinner." "Party in years," Ian chuckled. "And my father actually put his phone away for the entire evening. That's practically a miracle." Julia leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "So, family dinner at your parents' place next?" "Let's not push our luck," Ian teased, but his tone was affectionate rather than concerned. "Maybe brunch, shorter time, commitment, less pressure." "Baby steps," Julia agreed, echoing his words from weeks earlier. "We've got time." Have you ever experienced family members who didn't approve of your partner, or do you know someone who has? Share your thoughts in the comments. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations, house-closing arrangements, and increasingly harmonious family gatherings. To Julia's delight, her father and Ian had developed something resembling a friendship, bonding over the home inspection process and discussions about renovations for the new house. Tom had even offered to help Ian update the second bathroom, a project they planned to tackle together after the honeymoon. "Never thought I'd see the day," Donna remarked one afternoon as she and Julia addressed wedding invitations at the kitchen table. "Your father giving renovation advice to an investment banker." Julia smiled, watching through the window as Ian listened intently to Tom's explanation of some plumbing issue in the backyard. "Ian respects Dad's knowledge, and I think Dad is finally seeing that Ian isn't just his job or his background." "Your father was wrong about him," Donna admitted, selecting another envelope. "We both were to some extent. We saw the surface. The expensive clothes, the prestigious career, the privileged upbringing, and assumed there wasn't much beneath it. But now we see why you love him." Donna reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "He's kind, thoughtful, and he looks at you like you're the center of his universe. The rest is just details. Just details. The phrase echoed in Julia's mind as she continued addressing envelopes, thinking about how far they'd all come since that dinner when her father had first voiced his concerns. The differences between Ian's world and hers hadn't disappeared. They never would, but they had been put in perspective, recognized as aspects to navigate rather than obstacles to overcome. That evening, as Julia and Ian lay in bed discussing final wedding arrangements, she shared her mother's comment. She said, "All the differences between us are just details." Ian propped himself up on one elbow, considering this. "I wouldn't go that far. Our backgrounds, our different perspectives, they're significant. They've shaped who we are." He reached out to trace the line of her cheek softly. "But they're not barriers. They're just variables in the equation of us. Things we need to account for, but not things that determine the outcome." Julia smiled at his typically analytical approach. "The equation of us. I like that." "It's a complex equation," Ian continued, warming to the metaphor. "Lots of variables, some constants, a few unknowns we're still working out." "And the solution?" Ian's expression grew serious. "A life together that honors who we both are, while becoming something new, something neither of us could have created alone." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the simple truth of his words. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" "Mackenzie? I had a good teacher," he replied, echoing his words from weeks earlier. "This amazing woman who showed me that home isn't just a place or a set of coordinates on a map. It's where you're truly seen and accepted, even the parts of yourself you're still figuring out." As Julia drifted toward sleep, her head resting on Ian's chest, she thought about the journey they'd taken since her father had first shared his concerns. What had initially felt like a potential crisis had instead become an opportunity to examine their relationship more deeply, to confront differences they might otherwise have ignored until they became problems, to build a stronger foundation for their marriage. Her father's misgivings, she realized now, had been a gift in disguise. A chance to make sure they were moving forward with eyes wide open, aware of the challenges they might face, but confident in their ability to face them together. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cool, a perfect early summer day in Chicago. Julia stood in a room at the back of the venue, her mother helping her into the ivory gown that had hung on her bedroom door for months. A promise and a destination. "These were my grandmother's," Donna said softly, fastening the pearl earrings to Julia's ears. "She wore them on her wedding day, and I wore them on mine." "I remember," Julia replied, reaching up to touch the delicate pearls. "Thank you for letting me be part of that tradition. There's one more thing." Donna reached into her purse and pulled out a small blue handkerchief, carefully embroidered with Julia's new initials, J.M. "You're something blue. Your father and I had it made for you." Julia accepted the gift, emotion tightening her throat. "It's beautiful, Mom." "We want you to know," Donna said, her voice thick with feeling, "how proud we are of you. Not just today, but every day. The woman you've become, the life you're building with Ian, it's everything we ever wanted for you." Julia blinked back tears, careful not to ruin her makeup. "Even though he's not what you expected? Not from our world?" "Especially because of that," Donna replied firmly. "You found someone who compliments you, who challenges you to grow while accepting who you are. That's rarer than you might think." She paused, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from Julia's gown. "Your father wanted me to tell you he was wrong about Ian. He sees now what you've always seen in him." Before Julia could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Her father entered, handsome in his rented tuxedo, emotion plain on his weathered face as he took in the sight of his daughter in her wedding gown. "You look beautiful, Jules," he said simply, his voice rough with feeling. "Mum says you've changed your mind about Ian," Julia said, watching her father's expression carefully. Tom nodded, uncharacteristically reflective. "I was protecting you from a threat that didn't exist. I saw his background, his career, his confidence, and I assumed he was looking down on us, on where you came from." He shook his head ruefully. "I was wrong. The man loves you for exactly who you are, and it turns out he's got more depth than I gave him credit for." "High praise coming from you, Dad," Julia teased gently, stepping forward to straighten his bow tie. "Yeah, well, don't tell him I said all that. His head's big enough already with all that financial genius stuff." Tom's gruff response couldn't hide the genuine affection that had developed between him and his soon-to-be son-in-law. "You ready to do this thing?" Julia nodded, a calm certainty settling over her. More than ready. The ceremony was everything Julia had hoped for. Intimate, meaningful, a true reflection of who she and Ian were individually and together. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, Julia looked into Ian's eyes and saw their future, reflected there, the home they would create together, the family they would build, the life they would share, with all its challenges and joys. At the reception, she watched with delight as their worlds continued to blend and merge. Her former college roommate deep in conversation with Ian's cousin about a shared interest in documentary filmmaking. Ian's father teaching her young nephew how to properly knot his tie. Her father and Ian's mother discovering a mutual passion for mystery novels. These connections, these bridges between their different spheres, filled Julia with joy and vindication. It could work. It was working. Later, as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Ian pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. "Happy?" "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "You?" "More than I knew was possible." He eased back slightly to look into her eyes. "You know what I was thinking about during the ceremony? How incredibly handsome you look in that tuxedo." Ian laughed. "Besides that, I was thinking about the first time you brought me to your parents' house for dinner. How nervous I was, how determined to make a good impression. And how spectacularly you failed," Julia teased, remembering his stiff formality, his attempts to impress with stories about work that had fallen completely flat with her father. "Completely bombed," Ian agreed good-naturedly. "But you know what? If your father hadn't told you I rubbed him the wrong way, if you hadn't shared that with me, we might have just kept going through the motions, never really addressing the differences between our worlds." Julia considered this. "You're right. It forced us to look at things we might have ignored until they became real problems." "Exactly. So in a weird way, I'm grateful for your father's initial disapproval." Ian spun her gently under his arm before drawing her back to him. "It made us stronger." As they continued to dance, Julia caught sight of her father watching them from the edge of the dance floor, a glass of scotch in his hand and a content expression on his face. When he noticed her looking, he raised his glass in a silent toast that encompassed both her and Ian. "He's come around," she murmured, nodding toward her father. Ian followed her gaze and smiled. "He has, and so have I in many ways. Your father taught me some valuable lessons about what really matters in life, such as that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the prestige of your address, that community and connection are worth more than accomplishments and accolades." Ian's expression grew thoughtful. "That sometimes the best things in life aren't planned or scheduled, they just happen." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Ian Mackenzie, are you telling me you've learned to be spontaneous?" "Let's not go crazy," he replied with a laugh, "but I'm working on it. For you, for us." The music changed, and other couples joined them on the dance floor, her parents swaying together with the easy familiarity of decades of marriage, his parents executing a perfect waltz, friends and family, from both sides of their lives, mingling and connecting in ways that would have seemed unlikely just months ago. "Look at them all," Julia said softly, "your world and mine coming together." "Not your world and mine anymore," Ian corrected, pulling her closer. "Just ours, the one we're building together." As the evening continued, filled with laughter, dancing, and the warm embrace of community, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Her father's concerns, which had once seemed like a potential catastrophe, had ultimately been the catalyst for deeper understanding, for confronting differences that might otherwise have remained unaddressed, for building a stronger foundation, for their life together. Later, as they prepared to leave the reception amid a shower of rose petals and well-wishes, Julia caught her father in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Tom asked, looking slightly puzzled. "For caring enough to tell me the truth, even when you thought I wouldn't want to hear it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, that. Well, turns out I was wrong. About him anyway. But you were right to make me think about it," Julia insisted. "To make sure I was going into this with my eyes open." Tom nodded, a rare vulnerability in his expression. "I just wanted you to be happy, Jules. That's all I've ever wanted. I am, Dad. Happier than I've ever been." As they drove away from the reception, headed for a downtown hotel before their flight to Hawaii the next morning, Julia leaned her head against Ian's shoulder, contentment washing over her in gentle waves. "So, Mrs. Mackenzie," Ian said, his voice warm with love and promise, "ready for our next chapter?" Julia smiled, thinking of all that awaited them. The new house in Ravenswood, the life they would build together, the future they would create, that would honor both their backgrounds while becoming something uniquely theirs. "More than ready, Mr. Mackenzie," she replied, lacing her fingers through his. "More than ready." 2 years later, Julia stood in the kitchen of their Ravenswood home, watching through the window as Ian knelt in the garden, patiently showing their infant daughter a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. Amelia Barrett Mackenzie, 6 months old and endlessly curious, reached out with chubby fingers, giggling as the butterfly fluttered away. The house had become everything they'd hoped for, a true blend of both their sensibilities. The original character that Julia loved had been preserved, while the updates Ian had insisted on, a modern kitchen, an efficient heating system, smart home features that made Julia roll her eyes, but secretly appreciated, made it comfortable and functional. The backyard now featured both the vegetable garden Julia had wanted and the sleek grill station that Ian had designed with her father's expert advice. Most importantly, it had become a gathering place. Sunday dinners now regularly included both sets of parents who had developed an unlikely but genuine friendship. The neighborhood block parties that Julia had grown up with were now part of their annual traditions, with Ian fully embracing his role as grill master alongside her father. And the small studio that Ian had surprised her with on their first anniversary had become her sanctuary, a place where she could pursue her art while balancing motherhood and her teaching career. As she watched her husband and daughter in the garden, a wave of gratitude washed over Julia. Her father's initial concerns about Ian had led them to confront the real differences in their backgrounds and values, to communicate more openly, to build a stronger foundation for their life together. What had once seemed like a potential crisis had become the catalyst for a deeper, more authentic connection. The doorbell rang, pulling Julia from her reflections. It was her parents, arriving early for Sunday dinner as usual, arms laden with her mother's famous apple pie and her father's latest garage sale find, a vintage toy that he was certain Amelia would love, despite being far too old for it. "Where's my granddaughter?" Tom called, his voice carrying through the house as he set down the awkwardly wrapped package. "In the backyard with Ian," Julia replied, accepting her mother's warm hug. "They're communing with nature." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Ian Mackenzie, communing with nature. Will wonders never cease?" Julia laughed, leading her parents through to the kitchen. "He's changed a lot these past 2 years. We both have." "For the better," Donna observed, setting her pie on the counter and peering out at the garden scene. "You've found your balance. That's not easy to do." Through the window they watched as Ian scooped up Amelia, pointing out something in the vegetable garden, his expression animated as he explained whatever had caught his attention to his daughter. Tom moved to stand beside Julia, his weathered face softening at the sight. "You know," he said quietly, "I've never been happier to be wrong about someone." Julia leaned against her father's shoulder, her heart full. "Me too, Dad, me too." Later that evening, after their parents had gone home and Amelia was asleep in her crib, Julia and Ian sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cool summer night. The neighborhood around them was quiet but alive, lights in windows, the distant sound of laughter from a gathering a few doors down, the sense of being part of something larger than themselves. "Happy?" Ian asked, his arm around her shoulders, echoing the question he'd asked at their wedding. "Completely," Julia replied without hesitation. "You?" "More than I knew was possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice thoughtful. "You know what I was thinking about today? How incredibly handsome you look pushing a stroller." Ian laughed. "Besides that, I was thinking about how close we came to missing all this." Julia looked up at him, questioningly. "What do you mean? If we'd ignored the differences between us, pretended they didn't matter, we might never have learned how to truly blend our worlds. We might have kept them separate, your family, my career, your values, my ambitions, instead of creating something new that honors both." Julia nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their marriage wasn't about erasing their differences, or one of them assimilating into the other's world. It was about recognizing those differences, respecting them, and finding ways to weave them together into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have created alone. "Your father did us a favor," Ian continued, "even if that wasn't his intention. He forced us to confront the gaps between our worlds before they became chasms we couldn't bridge." "Who would have thought my dad would be the relationship guru we needed?" Julia teased, but her words carried genuine appreciation for how far they'd all come. As they sat together on the porch of the home they'd built, not just the physical structure but the life they'd created within it, Julia felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't always been easy. There had been adjustments, compromises, moments of frustration when their different approaches to life had seemed incompatible. But through it all, they had maintained their commitment to understanding each other, to honoring both their backgrounds while forging their own path forward. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully, a perfect blend of both of them. Julia's artistic sensitivity already evident in her fascination with colors and patterns, Ian's analytical mind showing in her methodical exploration of her world. She would grow up with the best of both their worlds, the sense of community and spontaneity that Julia valued, the drive and planning that had served Ian so well. "You know what I love most about our life?" Julia asked softly. "What's that?" "That it's truly ours. Not yours, not mine. Something we've created together that wouldn't exist without both of us." Ian tightened his arm around her shoulders, his voice reflecting the same contentment she felt. The perfect equation. As night deepened around them, the stars emerging in the clear summer sky, Julia leaned her head against Ian's shoulder, grateful for the misunderstanding that had ultimately led to deeper understanding, for the concerns that had catalyzed communication, for the father who had cared enough to speak up even when he feared her reaction. Sometimes, she reflected, it's the challenges we face that lead us to our greatest growth, the moments of doubt that ultimately strengthen our certainty, the questions that help us find our most meaningful answers. "I love you," she whispered, the simple words carrying the weight of their shared journey. "I love you too," Ian replied, the promise of their future resonating in his voice. Always have, always will. And in that moment, surrounded by the home and life they'd built together, Julia knew with absolute certainty that her father had been wrong about Ian, and that his willingness to voice those concerns had been one of the greatest gifts he could have given them. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.